May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, our freedom, and our new life. Amen. I'm overwhelmed with gratitude and joy and love for the presence of our dear friend Joan Bierman. Thank you, Joan, for being with us. For Rabbi Ken Chasen and his wife Allison from Leo Beck Temple. For Beth and David Meltzer. For my dear friend Mike Farrell, leader in putting an end to capital punishment in the world, with his wife Shelley Fabre. Thank you very much for being with us today. Happy Easter, everyone. Happy Easter. Well, at this point in my tenure as rector of All Saints Church, I think I can now tell you that I've been doing this job not for the money. I've been doing it for the stories. The stories. The burning bush in the whole thing has been stories of healing and transformation you've shared with me and one another in community. This morning's sermon title is taken from one of the Niagara Falls of stories into which you in this faith community have invited me. I was able to be the staff person present at most of the new member classes, which culminated last night in 50 new people joining All Saints. The new members classes here are about story sharing in a process of what we call narrative theology. We share the tales of our journeys in the context of the ongoing story of All Saints Church and the ongoing, evolving, unfolding story of God, until all of the seekers in the new member class are able to make a discernment about whether or not All Saints Church is their new spiritual headquarters for the adventure we call life. Because I'm retiring on May 1, we determined that it would be advantageous to ask our now junior warden, who will become senior warden on the day I retire, to come and share his spiritual autobiography, and also to embody the reality that the DNA of All Saints is solidly intact, alive and well, and living in the passions and commitments of All Saints members and its leaders. Jason Lyon is his name. He just read the first reading. Jason talked a bit about his childhood, but then moved on into the part of his story where he met his now husband, Tim Hartley. And Tim, incidentally, was baptized last night. Now, Jason and I, along with a great number of All Saints members, grew up in a Southern Baptist environment. At All Saints, if you are not a cradle Episcopalian, which very few of us are, or if you're not a Buddhist, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, atheist, All Saintser, or if you're not a Roman Catholic or a current Roman Catholic, a former Roman Catholic or a current Roman Catholic who enjoys worshiping at All Saints, and yes, there are a few Lutherans and Presbyterians and Methodists, oftentimes clergy or children of clergy thrown in. If you're not one of those, then you must be a Southern Baptist. Or have some evangelical, Pentecostal, or even fundamentalistic roots. Now, we Southerners grow up in what Flannery O'Connor calls the Christ-haunted South. We all know the story of Jesus, and one of the Roman Catholic bishops of Atlanta said that everybody in Atlanta is a Baptist. The Presbyterians are Baptists, even the Jews are Baptists. So it was a great surprise that when Jason met his to-be husband and was talking about the importance of his church life and mentioned in particular the importance of the resurrection, Tim raised the question, what is this resurrection thing? Well, now that's a pretty appropriate question for Easter morning, but a very rare inquiry on a romantic date. So back to the new members class. If I can reel you back there. Jason then told the new members class as he was sharing his story that he had had a very tough patch in his life when he actually felt dead. And then bringing his hand to his heart and not being able to speak for a moment, with tears in his eyes, Jason Lyons said, I then said to Tim that resurrection is what it's all about, because I know what it's like to be dead and then to have new life. That's the point of our celebration here this morning, my friends. All of us, to some degree, know what it's like to be dead and then to be brought to new life. I love our friend Father Greg Boyles' story about Miguel. I don't have time to tell it in the luscious detail Greg uses in his book, Tattoos on the Heart. But the story is my second of the day. It's about a 23-year-old homie named Miguel who worked with Father Greg on the graffiti removal crew at Homeboys. Greg first met Miguel when Miguel was in prison. He had been completely abandoned by his family. Prior to their rejection of Miguel, his family had mistreated Miguel, abused him, and scarred him. Greg tells the story about Christmas Day. Miguel had described it to Greg, and Miguel had invited all of his friends from the graffiti removal team at Homeboys who had no family. None of them had a place to go for Christmas. So Miguel named for Greg the 5 homies who had come over to his home apartment in East LA. And Greg remembered all 5 and knew that they were all former enemies from rival gangs, and each had tried to kill the other at some point in their journey. And in the midst of this, Miguel had cooked a turkey. No dressing, no sides, just turkey. Salt and pepper, what Miguel called a gang of butter, and 2 limones squeezed on top. Greg writes, one would be hard-pressed to imagine something more sacred and ordinary than these 6 adult orphans staring at an oven together, waiting for the turkey to cook. That scene is the entire law and the prophets, all in one moment, right there in this humble, holy kitchen. Miguel continued to get Father Greg's attention with his resilience about life. Here was a man in his early 20s who was orphaned, beaten, abused as a kid, and resilient, magnanimous, a person who gathers enemies together for a meal in his own home. So finally, one day, Greg had the opportunity to ask Miguel, how do you do it? I mean, given all that you've been through, all the pain and stuff you've suffered, how are you like the way you are? Miguel had his answer at the ready. You know, G, I always suspected that there was something of goodness in me, but I just couldn't find it. Until one day, and Miguel quieted a bit, One day I discovered goodness here in my heart. I found it. Goodness. And ever since that day, I have always known who I was. Miguel paused, caught short by his own truth, and turned and looked at Greg. And now, nothing can touch me. My friends, I don't care if it's Jason Lyon or Miguel or Greg Boyle or you or me. I don't care if you're Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, Roman Catholic, atheist, or whatever. The fact that you may have been orphaned, beaten, abused as a kid, you may be a victim of the horrors of terrorism or the silent but nevertheless wounding abuses of racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, sexism, homophobia. The resurrection is about discovering what Jesus discovered when he was killed. You don't have to be a Christian to believe what I'm about to say about what Jesus brought back from the grave in his consciousness, my friends. You don't even have to believe in God or the Christ or the Holy Spirit to get the resurrection. What is key and what Jesus brought back from the grave is this: that there is within you something that is unkillable. You can call it the Christ. You can call it the Messiah. You can call it goodness. You can call it God consciousness. You can call it the Buddha mind. I prefer to call it love, but it is real, my friends, and it is unkillable. It will always rise from the dead. On Monday, Thursday, Pope Francis drove 18 miles outside of Rome to the reception center for asylum seekers to wash the feet of 12 refugees. He usually washes the feet of priests in the Vatican. He went to this refugee center to wash the feet of 12 refugees fleeing war and terrorism from their home countries. Breaking tradition further, the Pope washed the feet of women, of Hindus, and of Muslims. And then he told those who were gathered that we need to embrace outcasts, not complicated theology. He said what all people of all faiths know when they have God consciousness, that most religion is satisfied and desires a God who pushes our human sufferings and the messiness of human life away. We usually want a strong, powerful, and clean, and pure, pristine God that says that if your life is messy and complicated, that is Satan or the not God. But the God that this morning's story is talking about is the God who does not push away our sufferings, but rushes to enter into our sufferings, breaking through our less than stellar selves and lives, not only to love us, but to give us the feelings and consciousness that Jesus brought back from the grave. And that is that divine love lives within us. Now, it must be said that the divine love which lives within us is a radically egalitarian love. It resides in everyone in its fullness. John O'Donohue, Thomas Merton, Meister Eckhart, all the mystics agree that there is this place in the center of our souls and hearts where sin and abuse and trauma has never touched. And as Miguel said, never can touch me. It is your place, my friends, your place of equipoise and courage and insight and compassion and daring. And too often, this font of refreshment and new life and love is painfully ignored and not accessed by us all. Right now, we are caught in a mighty struggle the world over that is manifest in the United States presidential election dynamics, particularly between this story of egalitarian love and universal unkillable love in everyone, even those in whom it is heavily disguised. On the one hand, and what George Lakoff calls the strict father, authoritarian, strong man narrative, with this notion of top-down power and a hierarchy of God above man. It's not man and woman in this narrative. It's God above man, man above nature, the disciplined, strong people, the rich people above the undisciplined and weak people, the rich above the poor, the employers above the employees, the adults above the children, Western culture above any other culture, and our country exceptionally above every other country. And the hierarchy extends to men above women, whites above non-whites, Christians above non-Christians, straights above gays. Whites above non-whites, men above women. And this is the narrative that is contributing to today's divisive social regression. That is the narrative that tortures and crucifies and sends drones and war to kill. That is the narrative that crucified Jesus. It is the narrative that is crucifying people this moment. While we were in worship this morning, another suicide bomber hit Pakistan. The Pope went on to preach. He said, behind Judas, there were those who gave Judas money so that Jesus would be delivered over to Pontius Pilate. And then he said, and behind that act of terrorism in Brussels, there are armament manufacturers, arms traffickers who want blood, not peace, who want war, not brotherhood and sisterhood. We all have different cultures and different religions, but we all have the same God, the Pope said. We are all sisters and brothers. Until we recognize that, we will never have peace. The heartbreaking and wounding reality of this narrative, my friends, is that when it goes unexamined, when it goes without critique, when this narrative of the strict authoritarian father goes untransformed, it always transmits its toxins to all, especially to those lower on the pecking order. But everybody's wounded by it, even those in the privileged supremacists' ranks. And the higher you get in the hierarchy, and the less you have examined the unearned privilege there, the more emotionally and psychologically fragile you are. What's more, if you've not examined the supremacy and privilege that you have, the more you want to fight to return to an America that was only true in a deluded fiction. And what's even more pernicious about this narrative is the more you scapegoat those below you in the pecking order for your inferior position. You don't dare critique the ones above you. That's how you get a state of Georgia and a state of North Carolina vying for pioneer status in bigotry against people of color, in regressive voting laws, and against people who are of a different sexual orientation or of a different gender identity. When Dr. Dan Siegel was with us teaching about the interface of neuroscience and spirituality last month, we got into a conversation about how so many people who come to All Saints come to be healed of the wounds that they've received from religious abuse. Dr. Siegel was puzzled by this. Being raised in a scientific, secular family, he had not known of religious abuse. And so John Depphaus simply asked if everybody in the room would raise their hands if they had had religious and spiritual abuse, and the hands were by far in the majority. And then we also began to speak at that moment about there being so many people at All Saints who are pioneers in their family. If you do the genograms, the family maps of people who attend All Saints, so often you will find that they are the persons in their own families who are trying to lead their family out of dysfunction and into health. There is a member here at All Saints Church who, during her premarital counseling with me in my office, told me about her desire to be the chief of her family's tribe, as she put it. A family racked with addiction and attendant problems, but through her own recovery from addiction, that she was going to offer herself as a delivery system for her health to her tribe. At 9 o'clock, a teenager right here knelt at the communion rail. I gave him the host, and he looked at me with the most earnest, penetrating eyes and said, "Why doesn't humanity ever learn from its mistakes?" I thought, well, I was prepared for coffee hour questions, but not communion rail questions. And my first impulse was to say, there's more I can get into here while I'm distributing communion. And then a voice said, answer that guy's question. And I said, it's because we aren't doing enough to tell the whole world that the most powerful dynamic in each human being is love, that knows that it is interrelated and interconnected in a mutual network of responsibility. Easter, my friends, is about discovering the unkillable love that beats in every human heart, and then accessing that love to become a pioneer yourself in healing and transforming a wounded world, struggling and still making outcasts and hierarchies. Let's remember that love doesn't live in complicated theologies. Love doesn't even live in ideas. Love lives in persons. Love is not a concept. Love is a powerful, transforming energy that heals, reconciles, unites, and makes whole. Love draws together, heart to heart, center to center. Love is not what God does. Love is what God is. Love is the goodness of God. That is why Good Friday and Easter Sunday are so significant. Not as mystical objects of devotion, but as the theological center of life. Resurrected life. The resurrected life of love is the most revealing statement there is about God. And it is the most revealing truth about you and me. You and I are unkillable love. Know that today. That is your deepest truth. It is God's deepest truth. Unkillable new life love is the place where you and God meet. And when you and I find that love not only in our hearts, but seek it and encourage it in those most different from us, we know and feel and access it rather than make God or love some theological abstraction. Do not make Easter an abstraction. Make it a reality, a felt reality. not only for your own healing and transformation, but for the healing and transformation of this world racked by bigotry and violence. Happy Easter, y'all.